Recording started.
Okay, recording should be started. So, welcome to the Manhattan GMAT Study Hall for July 26th. Thursdays with me. I'm Ron. So, welcome everybody. More strength and weaken problems. Last time we did some additional problems in this topic, and we had lots of depth and not really too much breadth. We didn't really cover too many individual problems. So the upshot was that there were a lot of slides left to cover, and the other part of this is that most of the submissions from this past couple weeks were problematic, and we'll look at a couple of those here in a second. But a lot of people have been submitting stuff that we can't really use. So a couple of submissions were pretty good, and we're going to consider looking at those, where by we, I guess I just mean me. I'll consider looking at those in the next couple of study halls, but make sure you pay attention to the rules here about what you can submit and what you can't. So, okay. Here's the basic rules. Remember, the guidelines are these. Nothing too general, nothing too specific, and no personal issues. The real issue that people are having here is there's still a lot of these two things going on. There's still a lot of people submitting really, really specific questions that are much better suited for the forum. And then there have been quite a few people lately submitting personal issues about this is my study plan and here's my schedule and stuff. And we do have places for these things, but those places are not the study hall. The places are the forums. So there's a folder, someone's messaging me and saying they can't hear. So let me type a response to that real quick. Hold on, guys. Okay. Remember that we have the forums, okay? So if you have a really specific issue, go to the appropriate folder in the forum, and if you have a personal issue, go to the general questions folder. So here are some illustrations of this. This was submitted last week. This is a personal study plan question. This is a good question, okay, but it's not the kind of thing that we want on here. So, because remember that this is a workshop that is watched by quite literally hundreds of people. So it wouldn't make sense to discuss your personal study plan with like 500 people who are going to watch a recording. General questions folder, here's the address for the forums. This is where things like this go. They go in the general questions folder. That's why we made that folder, so that we can answer exactly these sorts of queries. So please route them to that folder. Also, these two submissions are from the last couple of weeks too, and there were a lot of these, but these are two examples of stuff that we don't want to do in a study hall because they're just random individual issues. Like, this is two problems from the strategy guide, and this is exactly why we have a forum, so that we can answer isolated questions like these. I mean, in fact, this is the exact purpose of the forum. So please post questions like this in the forum. Thanks. Also, this kind of thing, this is a question about kind of random sentence grammar. Again, it's not a bad question, but it doesn't belong in a study hall because it's not a topic. It's not something that we can use as a thing that will provide an hour and a half of discussion. Because the one thing we do want to have in these lectures is a theme that is continuous. We don't just want to do an hour and a half of random questions like this, because that wouldn't be very helpful for anybody watching a recording. So, and finally, please don't be rude. As we say, we say this each time, but there may be language barriers here. I mean, in other words, people may not be being rude on purpose, but remember that it doesn't, when it comes to written communication, you have to understand the implications of what you write. So even if you're trying to be very polite, if you write something that sounds rude in English, then that's still a big issue, especially if you are looking at a future career in business, which is all about people and relationships. So, you know, I mean, these are probably things that are just translated in ways that you know, they may originally have been polite, but now they're not. Like, we get submissions that are like, I expect you to do this, or, you know, things along those lines. You should do this. Well, that doesn't come across the right way. So just make sure you know the implications of what you write as far as that kind of stuff goes. Finally, we have archives, so please check them. I think at this point there are 64 Thursday recordings. That's a lot. 64 is a whole bunch. What that means is that a lot of topics are already going to be in there in various ways. And the implication is that you should search the archive first. Like, we had a few people submit topics that are basically already here. And I mean, that's fine, but just make sure that you say what you want to cover that hasn't already been covered, if you're going to do that. So watch, like if you're going to submit, you know, inequalities, there's already 3 inequality sessions. So please watch those first, see what's in them, and then if there's something that you want to cover that has not been covered, then please say what that actually is, and that'll help us a lot here. So, okay, those are the rules. It's kind of the way it works. It's the way that it always works. Any questions about the rules, please type them in the text box. Otherwise, give me the smiley face icon. The smiley face icon is over there on the left. If you understand the rules, smiley face. Okay, solid. Let's do it. So remember, the topic is, it's a continuation of the topic from the 12th. There's going to be more strengthening, weakening problems. So, and we're going to reiterate. So for those of you who weren't there on the 12th or didn't watch that recording, we're going to reiterate some of the main themes from there. So let's take a look. The problems that are in these slides are from GMATprep, unless the slide specifically says that the problem is not from GMATprep. In those cases, it'll be from our own CAT software. So, good stuff. There is a new GMATprep issued like a month or 2 ago, so if you are unaware, then check it out. All right. Also, as usual, you're going to see these polling buttons, the choices A through E. So just to make sure we're all on the same page with that, you should see buttons that look like this somewhere in the top left area of your screen. If you've been doing these study halls for a while, you'll know this, but in case any of you are new, these are the buttons that you should click to answer the questions. To answer the problems, please use these buttons. Please do not type answers in the text in the chat box. Just so that everybody gets a fair shot at the problem. You're not going to see each other's answers, so it also keeps it, I mean, this is already pretty private because no one has any idea who you guys are, but it makes it more private too, whatever. So don't type answers in the chat box, please. Thank you. Also, please click your answer only once, because if you click your answer more than once, the second time it will delete the answer that you picked the first time, and that's bad. So, okay, smiley face if you see the buttons, smiley face if you see where those are at. Okay, solid. So, all right, let's do it. Strengthening, weakening questions. So let's take a look at this one. Here's a timer. Go for it. Please remember to use the letter buttons to indicate your answer. Thank you. Okay, there are still several of you who haven't answered the question, so if you haven't yet, please answer. Remember, if any of you are brand new to this, this is GMAT. The GMAT is a test that doesn't let you not answer questions. Like you actually have to provide an answer to the question or else you cannot move on until you do. So even if you have to guess, make sure you pick something. So Amy, you just erased your answer. Akanksha, you haven't picked anything. Amy, you just click it. There you go. Anu, you haven't picked anything yet. And Lois, you haven't picked anything yet. And okay. All right, here are your class responses. Some of you still haven't picked an answer yet. Remember, this is a test where you have to do that. That's basically the end of the story there, is you got to answer all the problems. So if any of you are not answering the problems, just keep that in mind. You have to. It's not really an option. So, okay. Let's discuss briefly what the general mindset you should have for these kinds of problems is. And we'll come back to that specific problem in a second, but what's the general mindset or approach that you should use for strengthening and weakening arguments? Because remember that when we say general mindset or approach, that's basically everything. I mean, it's like 99% of this whole game. Because remember that there's not any knowledge involved here. Like, there are no facts that you can know that will help you out. So this is really about what is the way that you should think about these problems. So does anybody, in the text box, what are some aspects of the fundamental approach here that you should take when you strengthen or weaken arguments? Text box. See what people have to say. Looking for the key. Yeah, I like what Amy says here. Figure out what the argument is. I mean, that's a good way to say it. A lot of you guys are also saying things that are equivalent, but I like the words that Amy is using here. So, I mean, yeah, to slightly rephrase this, there's going to be an issue. There will be an issue in the argument. So, and usually, this issue can be phrased in the form of a yes/no type question. So, like, here's an example of unrelated to the problem that we just saw. But let's say you have something like, hey, Joe, the job market in your field is booming in Dallas. Therefore, you should move to Dallas. I mean, the argument here is, the issue here is, should Joe move to Dallas, yes or no? And notice that you can phrase that very easily as a yes/no type question. So, should Joe move to Dallas, yes or no? And I mean, in this case, a yes would strengthen the argument and a no would weaken it. And I mean, so, okay. So there will be an issue, absolutely. So, and you have to identify what the issue is. And when Amy says figure out what the argument is, that's probably what Amy means. Now, this person, I don't know if it's a he or a she, is saying, I try to figure out the assumption. I mean, this can work in some instances, but not in others, and you have to be very careful with this kind of thing. Because, you know, there are going to be lots and lots and lots of ways that you can weaken or strengthen these things. And some of them are predictable and some of them are not. So this is really kind of a maybe sort of thing. But there's two things to be careful about here. The first is that there are lots of ways to strengthen or weaken arguments that won't be predictable. So if you're limiting yourself to just the things you can predict, then you're going to be in trouble. So, like, in other words, it can help to predict things, but you don't want to only look for things that you come up with as assumptions, because it's going to be terribly limiting. The other factor is that this process will probably make things harder for you, because strengthening and weakening arguments is a very, like, natural, real-world way of thinking. But by contrast, explicitly pointing out assumptions is much less natural. I mean, what we mean by this is, like, when you're a child of age 6 or 7, you can already strengthen or weaken arguments. Like, if your father says you're in trouble because you put that baseball through the window, like, even though you're 7 years old, you already know how to weaken that argument. You're like, oh, the neighbor kid actually did it. Okay, there's a weakener. Versus, like, pointing out assumptions is much harder, because that's the reason why they're assumptions, is that people don't normally point them out. So if you're going to transform this, yeah, right? Like, if you're going to transform this into an assumption, the danger there is that you're taking a much more natural thought process and you're transforming it into a much less natural thought process. And that can cause issues. I mean, there are some problems where this is not a bad approach, but you want to be conservative with trying to do this, because in general, it's easier to think about weakening or strengthening than it is to think about assumptions. So, In fact, that's why, this is not a lesson on assumptions, but that's why there's a whole negation method for assumptions, because it does exactly the opposite of that. It takes assumption questions, which are not very natural, and transforms them into weakening questions, which are. So just make sure you know that. Okay, so there will be an issue in the argument, yes. And you can usually phrase it in the form of a yes/no type question. So let's make this a little bit smaller, and let's talk about what's the issue in this argument. And let's look at the question statement here. It's a little bit unusual the way they're doing this, but the same function in the argument as the statement in boldface. What this means is that you don't need the statement in boldface. So you can just pretend there's a blank there. So let's do that. Such water would be useless in improving physical performance since blah, period. So this whole thing is what tells you that you're trying to weaken the argument, because the people who are marketing this thing pretty clearly think that it's supposed to improve physical performance. So let's take a look. What's the issue at hand here? Who can tell me in the text box? What's the actual issue? Ryan says, is the word however leading you to realize you're weakening the argument? Maybe, but hopefully not. I mean, the thing that should make you realize you're weakening the argument should just be like, think about this argument like, imagine that someone is actually saying these things to you, and it should be clear. Like, if someone just says this to you, hey, they're selling this stuff that is extra oxygen in there, and they think it's supposed to, you know, improve your performance at the gym, but it's not going to. I mean, when you say that, it should be very clear that you're trying to contradict this idea that this will improve your performance. So, right. So the issue is, I mean, they do, Amy, the amount of oxygen absorbed by muscles, they do tell you this. They do tell you that one of the limiting factors is how much oxygen, so this implies that if you could increase the oxygen in the bloodstream, into the muscles, then it would improve performance. So this is a fact. By the way, let me roll back here in the chat box, and Prashant points out that you have to treat these things as facts, and this is true. So it's a fact that more oxygen to the muscles will increase performance, because that's what this means for this to be a limiting factor, is that it puts a ceiling on it. So this means that if you can get more oxygen into the muscles, then performance will be better. So the question is, Nalin, you have to be more specific than that, because there's an issue at hand here. So the issue, as a lot of you guys are stating, is will superoxy actually do what? Text box. Will superoxy, some of you guys are getting at it. Let's see. Will it improve performance? Okay, fine. But look at how the argument works, right? What's the only way, according to the argument, what's the only way that we know in which it could do that? Like, if it's going to improve performance in a way that's relevant to this argument, then how's it going to have to do that? Yeah, will superoxy, that's the real issue. Will superoxy put more oxygen into the muscles? Yes or no? That's the issue. And I mean, it's very important to identify the issue as explicitly as you can before you start looking at any choices, because that's just what we do, right? Here's our example with Joe moving to Dallas. Like, before you start talking about ramifications of things, you got to be like, okay, this is the issue. The issue is, should my friend move to Dallas or not? And until you realize that that's what you're arguing about, it's kind of pointless to really consider anything. So, same sort of thing. This is the real issue. So, A doesn't have anything to do with this. This is irrelevant to superoxy. I mean, yes, there are world-class athletes who don't need it, but that doesn't tell you anything about what it does. SO for superoxy. This is also irrelevant to the issue. This, however, is not, because we think that superoxy will put oxygen into the muscles, but this says that you cannot get oxygen into the muscles by any way other than breathing it. So, no one drinks through their lungs. So, this suggests that the answer is no to this issue, to this yes-no question that we're talking about here. Lack of oxygen is not the only factor, fine, but it happens to be the one that we're talking about. And there's no connection between possible other factors and this superoxy drink. And then also lost water doesn't have anything to do with superoxy either. So like what you can see is if you identify the issue exactly enough, then basically you're going to get one choice that totally addresses the issue in the right way and 4 choices that don't. So this is going to be C like cat. Any questions about this whole thing, please type them in the text box. But hopefully what you see here is that there's a thing that you're arguing about. And you have to establish what that is first. It's like a conversation. I mean, a lot of this is meant to be not like anything you would study and more like normal kind of dinner table conversation in the sense that, you know, there's an issue that people are talking about. And you don't want to digress from the issue. So, okay. There is one person typing, so let's see what he has to say. I mean, Ryan, you should at least check them out. I mean, if you are absolutely sure that something is a slam dunk and you are way behind on time, then maybe, but still it's risky. I mean, it doesn't take very long to read through the choices, so you should at least check them all out. I mean, if you see one that very clearly addresses the issue, then fine, but you should still at least glance over the others just to make sure. So, any questions? Okay. How about something like this? Here's a timer. Go for it. Everybody pick something, please. Amy, I don't see, there you go, there's something. Kevin, number 3, I don't see an answer. Nalene, I don't see an answer. Robbie said, and okay, everybody else. Okay, here you go. Here's your responses in the class. We've got a decent majority of A, but it's not, you know, it's not a majority, it's a plurality. But most people are kind of all over the place. Let's take a look. What is the issue in the problem? Text box. Like, remember that it should be, this is an explain the discrepancy problem. So it's not strictly a strength and weaken problem. This is more like, it's a different, this is an explain the weirdness type question. Not really the same type, but the approach is pretty much the same. The difference is, and I mean, it's actually my fault for this, including a problem that's not strength and weaken in here. There's one difference in here before you type more. The difference is that in explain the weirdness questions, the issue should be a question that starts with why instead of a yes-no question. Strength and weaken, it should be a yes-no question of some kind, because ultimately strengthening and weakening is saying yes or no to something. But explain the weirdness, yeah. Like, the weirdness is a why did this happen, but the focus on a single issue is the same as it was before. So, this is the deal. Why did the cost continue to go up? Despite, Prashant, you don't put of after despite, you just say despite. So why did the expenditures continue to go up despite price control? That's the issue. So we need something that is relevant to that issue. And I mean, notice how the price control works. The price control means you can't raise the price of any existing product. So, and notice that it's and notice that the weirdness is that the per capita price, the spending on drugs went up. So that's also an important thing to realize here, is that it's a per person, not overall expenditures. This is why B is not correct, because B doesn't address the issue of per person cost. Like, if it just said that total spending on drugs in the country, so Ryan, yeah, thanks for pointing that out. If it just said that total spending on drugs in the country went up, then choice B would be a good way of explaining that. Hey, there's more people, so there's more dollars or whatever. But it doesn't work here because it's dollars per person, so population becomes a non-factor. So what the choice is, aha, you're producing new medications. There's no restrictions on the price of these. So that would explain this perfectly, because the legislation doesn't affect those at all. Satish says this. Let me put this in the box, because it does, and you have to be able to pick up on stuff like this. It says raising. So raising means taking an existing value and making it bigger. So if you were pricing a brand new product, that would not be raising a price. It would be setting a new price. So you have to read these things carefully enough to make realizations like that. So careful. I mean, that's why it's existing prices. Yeah. So C, high profit levels despite the price freeze. I mean, profits are not relevant here because we're not talking about profits. We're talking about how much people spend, so revenues. Like the issue is increased revenue per person, not profit. Profit doesn't matter. And then D, in fact, D is probably the worst choice of these, because what does D actually do to the issue? Does anybody see what the effect of that choice is? Yeah, it makes, I mean, weaken it actually points in the opposite direction. This makes the weirdness even more weird. Because we're trying to explain why people spent more money on drugs, and D is saying they bought drugs that cost less. So that would be even weirder. I mean, E has kind of the same issue. Like E is, again, you're removing the expensive things. So that doesn't, this also goes the wrong way. So the issue is this, and so you can see that in each of these types of questions, the most fundamental thing you can do here is figure out what the issue is and then go from there. Any questions about this? If you have them, type them in the text box. And now let's move on to another problem. Okay. How about this one? If the words are too small on the screen, then there's a way to resize your screen. I don't know exactly how, but it's in the menus somewhere under, I think it's under Tools, Whiteboard. So if you can't read this because the words are really tiny, then dig around the Tools, Whiteboard menu and see what you come up with. Okay. This is longer, so you can spend more time on it. So let me give you a slightly longer timer here. There you go. Give that a shot. Have fun. About 1/3 of you guys don't have answers yet. So you got to pick something. Okay, most of you have something at this point. Maya, you don't. Nalin, you don't. Prabhakar, you don't. No, you do. Okay, still waiting on Maya. That's kind of about it. Okay, well here's your responses. Okay, this one people are totally all over the place. Let's take a look. So there are a couple of official problems that work the same way, but this is like two strengthening and weakening problems for the price of one. Which one would support one of the given explanations and undermine the other one? So what this means is you actually have to deal with two separate issues, and you have to get basically a yes type thing to one of the issues and a no to the other. So there's most famously, there's a problem somewhere in the official guide about tiger beetles that works like this. It's one of those problems that everyone loves to hate on the forums. But, okay, so the point is they do problems like these. So what are the issues? Like, what is explanation number one in simple words, and what is explanation number two? Like we're trying to explain why 100 calorie packs are selling so well. So what's explanation number 1, text box, and what's explanation number 2? Yeah, explanation number 1 is the packs are convenient. Like people buy them, like they appeal to people who don't want to bother sizing out their own snacks. Number 2 is that they still feel substantial. Like they are, like they still look and feel like a real size snack. Which appeals to, like, this will help dieters who would just eat whatever. Right. So, but the words that it says here are important. Like, I mean, binging can be avoided, yes, but also this whole idea that it looks and feels like a real snack matters a lot. So, and anything smaller than that doesn't really work. So, convenience, and then they still look and feel like a real snack. So, let's talk about how these, let's just talk about issue 1 first. Like what you don't want to do is keep flopping back and forth between issue 1 and issue 2. Like you definitely want to concentrate on the same thing at the same time. So let's color code these accordingly. Issue number 1 will be brown, and issue number 2, I guess we'll make red. Let's make it that bronze kind of color instead. So there. Yeah, those aren't that different. How about blue and bronze? Okay. The other principle that you want, this is all across the board. This is the whole test. This is math, this is verbal, this is everything. Like you should do the same thing at the same time. So do not take each answer choice and first evaluate argument 1 and then evaluate argument 2. That's way too hard. So instead, because your brain will just get confused after enough of that. So like think about number 1 for all 5 choices. Then after you're done thinking about number 1, think about number 2 for anything you haven't eliminated. Because I mean, if something is irrelevant to the convenience hypothesis, then you don't even have to bother with the other one, right? So, okay, let's talk about number 1. Number 1 is it's a convenience hypothesis. So, yes or no, is it a convenience issue? So, A, they're willing to pay the same price as they are for traditionally sized snack portions. So, like, this seems to support number 1. Because that would be, I mean, this works with number 1. And that would be a reason why they would be willing to pay the same as they would for a bigger bag. They consume them as light desserts. This is irrelevant. It doesn't matter why they consume them or when, because the convenience hypothesis doesn't have to do with when or why. It just has to do with how. So this is gone. We don't even need to think about it anymore. C, busy young professionals. This works with number 1 because these people would care about convenience. Convenience would probably matter a lot more to busy young professionals than it would to random people. So that seems to work. manufacturers must charge more per ounce to make the same profit. We don't care. I mean, manufacturers' profits don't have anything to do with why people are buying the product. And then number E, like the idea that they sell worse when they're sold next to larger packages. This works against number 1. Because if the convenience idea is true, then it should make no difference whatsoever what is next to them in the store. Right? Because if people are buying these because they measure out more easily, then it shouldn't make any difference what is next to them. So the fact that placing them next to traditional bags slows their sales indicates that the convenience thing is actually not true. Okay. And remember, you want that to happen on one of the, I mean, you have to actually go against one of the issues and toward the other one. So this is, we gotta keep that because, you know. Okay, now number A, the problem with number A is that it also works with number 2. Because if people are willing to buy these things out of vending machines, they could be buying them for either of these 2 reasons. Right? I mean, number 1 just basically says that they are just as willing to pay money for these things as they are for the larger things. But, you know, number 1, like choice A, Trang, like choice A is almost exactly the same thing as what's already in the passage. Like the only thing that's really different about number 1 is that it mentions vending machines in particular. But you still have the same idea that people are willing to pay basically too much money for the small pack. So it works with number 1, and it also works with number 2. Like the point of A is just that people are willing to pay more than they should for the small pack, which doesn't work against either of those 2 arguments. It's kind of like what the argument already says. It just specifies vending machines, but it's the same idea. Kind of, yeah. I mean, it does provide this small difference of, oh, this is a vending machine, but you have to kind of think about it and say, I don't really care if it's a vending machine. Okay, B, a large number of buyers, we already eliminated that, but it's also irrelevant to number 2, because, you know, yeah. The problem with choice C is that choice C doesn't have any effect on hypothesis 2. It doesn't weaken it or strengthen it. This neither helps nor hurts number 2. Because the thing is that busy young professionals, like we have no idea how this relates to the appearance of the, like, you know, busy young professionals, there's no reason to think that they would think differently about how things look and feel. And there's no reason to think that they would have differences in their self-control either. So C is out because it doesn't work or not work with number 2. On the other hand, what E does is if they are right next to much larger portions, like the juxtaposition of those and the larger portions would work against making the 100-calorie portions look and feel like a real snack. So this works for number 2. Because number 2 is they're buying this 100-calorie pack because, I mean, Ryan, the issue is ultimately why are they buying the 100-calorie pack? But it's 2 issues. I mean, you can't compact these into one issue because you have 2 arguments here. So you really have to keep this separated into 2 issues. The first issue is, do they buy the 100-calorie pack? Because if you want to go the yes or no question route, you're going to have 2 yes or no questions here because there are 2 arguments. So do they buy 100-calorie packs because of convenience? Yes, no. Do they buy 100 cal packs because they still look and feel like real snacks despite their size? So, yes or no. And when you think about these two issues, the fact that the sales plummet when they are next to bigger bags makes perfect sense with hypothesis 2 and doesn't make any sense at all with hypothesis 1. Because, I mean, if it were the convenience reason, then E would be expected to have no effect on sales. Because, I mean, it's not any less convenient if you put bigger bags next to it. But with number 2, the hypothesis is they look and feel like a substantial portion. And if you're putting them on the shelf right next to portions that are bigger, then, you know, suddenly they're not going to look as substantial. So this works. If number 2 is true, that would explain exactly why people suddenly buy them less in that case. So you can't compact 2 issues into one. So, I mean, in this sort of rare case, in a sort of rare case where you have 2 arguments, you have to have 2 issues. So that's not the point. The point is the reason that people are buying these based on convenience. It's not are they convenient or are they not. It's not the issue. The reason is convenience the reason that people are actually buying them? You got to stay focused on that. So if people buy them less when you put them next to bigger bags, that suggests that convenience is not the reason. So it does undermine the argument. It doesn't affect the issue of whether it's convenient or not, because that's not the issue. The issue is why are people buying these things? And E suggests that the reason they're buying them or not buying them is not related to convenience. So, I mean, it's very, very important that you focus on the exact issue at hand. Like, this is, do they buy 100 calorie packs because of? It's not just, are they convenient? Is that the actual reason why people are buying them? So, that's the issue in the problem. Any other questions? Throw them in the text box, please. Amy, you've had some text in your box for a while. Amy, what he says is that when you put them next to bigger snacks, they don't sell anymore. So that very strongly points to the idea that the relative size of the snack matters. Yeah, it's like if people need to buy a car that feels like it's not a little dinky car, then you don't want to put it in the lot next to a big truck. Yeah, it's like that sort of thing. It's wrong. The difficulty level is irrelevant. It's just you got to be able to approach the problems all in the same way. I mean, if you've watched my study halls before, you know what my answer to that question is. The answer is it doesn't matter unless you write exams. Because you won't know, quote, difficulty levels, unquote, when you look at problems. So the best you can do is ignore that whole idea altogether and just have an approach that works. Like, even thinking about that is bad. It's a very bad thing to think about because it will take your mind off the actual issue. So it's important to not even give answers to questions like that. Okay, other questions? Okay, here we have the same question prompt. How about that? Cool. So we'll give you less time for this because the passage is exactly the same and the question is also exactly the same. But now we have 5 new answer choices. So remember that issue number 1 is, do people buy the 100 cal packs because of convenience? issue number 2 is, do people buy the 100 cal packs because they still look and feel substantial? That's the issue. That issue is plural. Okay. So you've already read the passage, so let me give you less time here, say like 90 seconds or something, and which should be more time than you would really possibly need. Let's say 77 seconds. So, all right, go for it. Okay. Get an answer to this, please. Remember, you've already read the passage and the issues, so you're only using your time to go through the choices. By the way, while you guys are, let me compact these a little bit, and well, I mean, we've talked about this in other study halls, but let me put this on the board and see what you guys think of it. This right here. This person says, wow, that's a very hard question to finish in 2 minutes. Does anybody know what the best response is to that? And there is a best response to that. There's basically one response that you should give to that. Does anybody know what that is? Yeah, no, however you say that, that's the wrong answer. Practice is also the wrong answer. Shines and Ryan are right. I mean, the answer is you don't have to answer questions like this in 2 minutes or anywhere close. Because, I mean, look how long the question is. Rupak, if you don't know a question after 30 seconds, guess and move on. If you do that, you're basically going to be guessing on every single question in the verbal section. Like, that's not, I mean, that's not realistic that you would be able to process all of these in 30 seconds. I mean, that clearly no. If that were true, you would have about 60 minutes left when you finish the section. That would be kind of crazy. The point, Amy, if that's the point, then fine, but that's probably not the point. I mean, there are a lot of students who think that there's a magical time limit that is the same for every single question. And it's a very bad way to think. Because if you think that there's a magical time limit, then you're not ever going to finish long problems. Like, the right response is you don't have to. Right? I mean, you can take longer. You take more time for problems that are longer, and you should take less time for problems that are shorter. I mean, notice it has nothing to do with perceived difficulty level either. It's just if the problem has lots and lots and lots of stuff in it, then you should take more time on it. It's like any other task in the world. Like if you paint houses for a living and it takes you an average of 4 hours to paint a house, then if you have to paint a gigantic mansion, you will not schedule 4 hours for that. You'll schedule like 8 hours or 7 hours or whatever. But if you have to paint a tiny, tiny apartment, then you would schedule more like, 2 hours. Because I mean, time management has a lot of common sense in it. And, if you apply that sort of common sense here, you'll realize that a 2-minute average is just an average. And you can go way above that on some problems, and you can go way below that on others. I mean, you shouldn't go crazy. You shouldn't, take 8 minutes or anything like that. But, that's how you achieve an average like that, is you spend more time on longer problems and you spend less time on shorter ones. So on a problem like this long, it's very much okay to take more than 3 minutes. Totally fine. And that's why I originally gave you guys a timer of like 3 minutes and 15 seconds or something really long like that, because it's a very long problem. So just keep that in mind. And a lot of you guys are thinking the right way about that, so good. But if any of you are thinking of these average times as though they were some sort of magical time limit, then make sure that you kind of get rid of that with a quickness, because that's not a good way to think. I mean, if you think like that, it will basically just destroy your ability to solve any problem of decent length. So, okay, so let's look at these problems, look at these choices. The choices, here's what you guys picked. So there's more of a consensus than last time, but there's still a lot of diversity in your answers here. Let's take a look. So first, let's talk about the convenience issue. Do these things support the hypothesis of convenience? So issue number one, is convenience the reason? Well, when you're putting things into your children's school lunches, I mean, maybe supports number one, but rather weakly. Because, I mean, it doesn't really directly support it. I mean, you could hypothesize that people packing school lunches would be concerned with this kind of convenience, but there's not really a strong reason to believe that people packing lunches would be any more concerned with convenience than anybody else. So, I mean, in other words, there's not really a good reason to believe that people packing lunches would suddenly care more about having to measure stuff out. So, I mean, may support number one, but very weakly. Like there's no direct connection between packing school lunches for kids and don't want to take the time to measure. I mean, as opposed to the busy young professional's choice in the last problem, which is totally very strongly correlated. Like you're saying these people are very busy, which means they want convenience because they're busy. So this doesn't say, you know, parents are busy. I mean, these could be parents who are otherwise home all day long. So who knows, right? We don't know. I mean, it could support it, but unlike busy professionals, it's not direct support. Some parents are very busy, others are less so. B, sales of things like almonds and cashews are very bad because there's like 10 nuts in a 100-calorie pack. This works against number one. Like this pretty much shows that convenience is not the issue. Because if convenience were the issue, then 100-calorie packs of almonds and cashews would sell just as well as 100-calorie packs of everything else would. So this pretty much undermines argument one. For the same reason that choice E did in the last choices, right? If convenience were the issue, then you would not expect any differences like these to exist. And if they do exist, that's problematic. In several studies, people who ate 100-calorie packs felt the same reduction in appetite after 30 minutes. Well, that's great, but that doesn't really give us any information about why people buy them. So no effect on these hypotheses. And in particular, there's no effect on the convenience idea. So this is definitely gone. I mean, A should also be gone because it's not very good support. They will not go stale or spoil before customers can eat them. This would suggest that convenience is not the issue. because it would suggest that lack of spoilage is the issue. So this suggests that convenience is not the reason why people are buying these things. And then manufacturers seal air into the packages along with the snacks to make them look bigger. That's great, but this has nothing to do with convenience. So, I mean, choice E definitely strengthens number 2 because they are making the packs look bigger. But the problem is that E has absolutely no effect on the convenience hypothesis. So, okay, 2 choices left, and we've got the other issue, which is, do people buy them because they still look and feel substantial despite their small size? So number B, I think you guys can tell, this definitely, this strongly suggests that that's the issue. That perceived size is the issue. Because what choice B is saying is precisely the 100-calorie packs that are really, really insubstantial looking are the ones that don't sell. So that's the choice we want. Because it suggests, at the same time, it suggests that number 1 is not the issue and also suggests that number 2 is. Because what it is saying is that people don't buy the packs when there's like 12 nuts in a bag, but they do buy them when there are more things in the bag. That suggests that number 2 is the thing. Choice D, I mean, Joanna, yes it does, but the choice E we eliminated because it doesn't affect number 1. Remember, you have to do both of these things. You have to support one hypothesis and go against the other one. It's not or, it's and. You have to do both of these things. If you think about D, the problem is that D actually works against both hypotheses. Like, it also suggests that perceived size is not the issue either. So D undermines both number 1 and number 2. Because D suggests that people are buying these for a third reason entirely, which is that they will not go bad as fast. That's not convenience of measuring, and it's also not perceived size. So D is bad because it weakens both hypotheses. Vincent says, well, how does B show that convenience is not the issue? I mean, remember what the issue is. The issue is, do people buy things because they are more convenient? If that were the reason, Vincent, then you would expect the 100-calorie packs of nuts to sell just as well, because there's no difference in convenience. So like basically B has massive differences in sales despite no difference in convenience, which suggests that convenience is not the point. I mean, if you don't see that, just make analogies. Like, let's say you had 2 jackets that both fit just as well as each other, but one was like $1,000 and one was $100. Then what that would suggest is that people are not pricing the jacket based on fit. Because if they did, then they would pay the same number of dollars for both jackets. Same kind of thing here. So I hope that helps. If people have other questions about this, fire away. If any of you are typing, in the meantime, we also made this comment in the sorry about that delay. Where were we? Okay, like notice that we have the same question here and we have entirely different answers to it. So remember what we did last time as well, which is we can come up with a good exercise is make a new correct answer to these kinds of problems, like when you have any kind of strengthen, weaken, or explain the weirdness type of problems. Or explain the weirdness type problems. So, I mean, you can do this, right? Like, if you got this question and the answer was B, then you could also make up something like, oh, when I put them next to other stuff, people don't buy them anymore. So those are both things that have the desired effect. So the point being that there are always like a million billion ways to strengthen or weaken things. So you should be able to make up answers other than the ones that are provided. And if you can, that means you're thinking the way you should think about these. And if not, it means you're not thinking really. If you can't make up any alternative answers, it means you're being too systematic in your thought. Yeah, Ryan's got that, right? I mean, what that choice says is that people, I mean, you're talking about packages that have 10 nuts in them. Like there's almost nothing in the package. And those are exactly the ones that people don't buy. So I mean, again, take yourself out of the GMAT and put yourself in the real world. Like if you have a bunch of items in the store and the ones that are not, like you're a store manager, you stock these things on your shelves. I mean, if you're looking at your shelves and people are not buying the products that have emptier bags, then what are you going to think as the store manager? You're going to think, oh, people don't want to buy things that look empty. That's how choice B works. I mean, again, if you think about it as you are a store manager, it's a lot easier than you are a person taking a random standardized exam. So, I mean, when you think about these, the most important thing you can do is take yourself out of this whole standardized test mode and put yourself into like a real world thinking mode of this is a situation that I'm actually personally in. And it'll help you think about this. Because if you think about managing a store and noticing that B was happening, you would instantly think, oh, look, people care how much stuff is in the package. That's what you would think. So that's what you want to do here, is think like that. I'm in the situation. So, I mean, you know, you can theorize academically all you want, but the consequences of B in the real world are pretty clear. So, okay. Other questions? Ryan, yeah, it's good. And I mean, that's why these problems are on the test is, you know, as a future business person, you have to make those kinds of connections, right? You have to, like, see evidence and say, what does this suggest about people's motivations or behavior? Like, you can't just depend on rigorous connections. Because when you are doing business and trying to anticipate the actions of consumers, it's not rigorous. I mean, people are not machines. So you have to be able to think in the way that choices like B require you to think. That's why there's a critical reasoning section on this exam. It's why you can't just grind a bunch of rules. Okay, we got time for one more, so let's do one more. How about this one? Tiger sharks. This one's a little shorter than the others, so let's go back to the regular 2 minutes-ish type of thing. Go for it. Remember to state the issue, at least in your head. You don't have to write it on paper, but remember to figure out the issue as a yes or no type question before you start considering the answer choices. Go for it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, tiger sharks. A, B, C, D, E, go ahead and pick something. If you have to guess, guess. That is Rupak, you got to pick something. Prashant, P, you got to pick something. Just you two. Prashant, Rupak. Okay, Prashant, you got an answer. Rupak, you don't. Remember the GMAT, Rupak, you got to pick something. I mean, you can't not answer these. So here's, okay, you're not picking an answer. Maybe you're not here, but remember that you can't be absent here. So, okay. There's your answers. The no answer thing is me and the people who are gone. But so looks like a lot of people are picking E. But what's the issue? Someone tell me what the issue is. Says you want to kill tiger sharks because it will help the economy. That's the point. Very good. In order to help the economy, the mayor of the island has proposed a program to kill tiger sharks. Will killing, that's the issue. Will killing tiger sharks help the economy? Yes or no? That's the issue. I mean, non-A, that's the idea, but those words are very general. I mean, you want to get specifics here. You want, if they said, like, non-A, name, I don't know how to pronounce that. Like, that's the way that they might ask a question. Like, they might write something like, oh, will it have the intended effect? If they do that, your job is actually to get rid of those words and replace them with things that are specific. Because, I mean, you know, it's like what you do in the real world. Like, if somebody says to you, hey, why are you acting like that? It's not really a general question about how you're acting. What it really is like a very specific question about some particular thing that you're doing. Like, it might mean, why are you, like, looking at me like that with those eyes? Or it might mean, like, why are you staring off into the corner? Nane. Okay, thanks. You know, but the point is that you can't answer a question like this until you make it specific. So you shouldn't just say, will it have the intended effect, because that's sort of dangerously ambiguous. Whereas if you have something like, will killing the sharks help the economy, that's what you do. So make the question, make the issue as specific as you can is the point. So, very important, which is why it's worth, I mean, I know you get it, but it's worth going on at length about here, because it's the thing you have to do. Okay, let's talk about E, because a lot of you guys are picking E, and E is not the point here, and that's, it's important to realize why E is not right. Like, E just says that, some people don't do what lots of other people do. This kind of thing will never affect an argument. Because that's not the point. I mean, of course there are going to be people who don't do X, whatever X is. I mean, like, it doesn't even matter what X is. Like, let's say that, I mean, I don't know, let's say you're going to consider building a new shopping mall in Beverly Hills, because lots of people shop in Beverly Hills. And so you're debating, you know, what the effects on the economy of Beverly Hills will be if you build this shopping mall. I mean, even if you say, look, some people go to Beverly Hills just to visit their family and they don't shop. Well, that's fine. We don't care. Because the point is that lots of people do shop, and that's what we're concerned with. It's the same thing if you're a business and you want to sell, like, winter clothes, then you're going to sell those clothes to people in places like Boston and Chicago. And I mean, even if you said, hey, some people in Boston leave for the winter and go to Florida, that's great. Most of them don't. And so you can still sell winter clothes there. So, yeah, I mean, Satish, that's basically the idea. Like, there is tourism, and that's all we care about. Like, I mean, yes, there are going to be people who don't engage in that, and we do not care. Because whenever you have a trend, the basic way to say the idea here is that whenever there's a trend, there will always be exceptions to the trend. It doesn't really affect discussion of the trend itself. I mean, if there's a trend, there's still a trend. I mean, remember, a trend doesn't mean everybody is doing it all the time. It just means that there's a pattern. So be aware of this, because a lot of you guys selected choice E, and choice E is not a good choice here. And it's one of the very few things that you do see repeatedly in these critical reasoning questions is wrong answers that are like, oh, some people don't do this kind of thing. Okay, so even if not all the tiger sharks that come close to the beaches are killed, the existence of the program would reassure tourists. So, seems to support it, although it's not great, because you know, it's reassuring them, which could have an effect. So this is decent support. The problem is we don't want support. We want to do what? Trong, you have the idea there. What does call into question mean? It means weaken. So this goes the wrong way. Because, I mean, reassuring tourists would contribute, however modestly, to strengthening tourism. And we don't want that. Business owners who depend on tourism are willing to pay the cost. We don't really care, because the argument, the issue is the effect of the program, not the funding. I mean, we don't care where the funding comes from, because it won't affect the outcome. I mean, there are some things where funding might matter. Like, for example, if you have a survey of people regarding some drug or something, then if a drug company is funding the survey, then that might conceivably have an effect. So you can't just rule out things like this. You still have to think about them. But in this case, you're killing sharks, and so it doesn't really matter where the money to kill sharks comes from. Versus if you had something where people might be influenced, like a survey or something, then that would be something to think about. But this is irrelevant. Money trap, Ryan, I'm wondering what you mean by that. That sounds like lingo that I don't know. Maybe you can explain. If that's a finance thing, then I don't know, but I don't know. Or, yeah, I mean, I'm curious. C, tourists come to the island for its beaches, even though it features a number of other attractions. I mean, this doesn't really help the argument, because the argument is already about those people. So, I mean, this basically reiterates what the argument already says. So, I mean, if anything, it confirms what's going on in the argument. So it doesn't really affect anything because it's already there. But if anything, it makes it a little bit more solid. It definitely doesn't weaken it. D says that tiger sharks eat small sharks that eat commercially important fish. Tiger sharks eat the smaller predators that eat commercially important fish. What does this mean is going to happen if you pick off the tiger sharks? Yeah, Ryan, I could see that, because I mean, people might think about money a little bit too much. I mean, I don't know if they would give. I mean, in a question like this, it is about the economy. So I could see, independently of business school things, I could see how they would want to give money choices, because it's like, dude, we're talking about the economy. But yeah, that does seem like something that could happen. Yeah, so just be careful with that. Our indom, it's the opposite of that. It's the small shark population would grow because the tiger sharks are gone. And then what will happen to the commercially important fish? They will what? The commercially important fish will what? They will go down. Yeah, they will get nom-nommed, exactly. And they will get eaten. So this means if you kill the tiger sharks, that means the chain of causation here is you kill the tiger sharks, which means you have more of the smaller sharks because there's no one's eating them anymore, which means you're going to have fewer of the commercially important fish. And that means that the island's fisheries will suffer. And these are all very strong connections that are explicitly made in the argument. These are not guesses. So this is what we want. And then like we said, I mean, yes, there are people who break the trend, but that will always happen in the case of any trend ever. So that doesn't really help or hurt. Any questions? We got to wrap up here. We're a little bit over the time, but if you have any quick admin questions, definitely shoot those at me real quick. If you have any questions about this problem, go ahead and put them up. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up here in the next couple of minutes. So we had a pretty big turnout today. Ryan, yes, every 2 weeks, although around holiday weekends and such things, sometimes there's blips in that schedule. Like I think it's around Labor Day, I think there's like a 3-week hiatus instead of 2. And then around Christmas, we don't meet. Rob Vithej, you just have to know what that means. What call into question means is it means to present evidence against something. So that's something that you should be familiar with and that you will probably learn along the way when you do these things. I may have done something on that at some point. I honestly don't remember what's in most previous study halls, but thanks, Ryan. I appreciate that. Robbie, you'll probably just come across them. I mean, I would be hesitant to go looking for lists because if you go find a list, it will probably contain mostly a bunch of crap that you don't have to know. I mean, it's kind of like looking for massive lists of idioms and sentence correction. I mean, you can find lists of English idioms everywhere on the internet because people like to learn English. But the problem with looking at things like that is that 95% of what's there you will not use. So I would just, encounter what you encounter in the practice questions and learn to decode them. Because I mean, they're not tricky people. I mean, they're not going to give you prompts that nobody will understand. So just, I mean, if you didn't know what that means, it's a good lesson. Now you know what it means. But it should be sufficient to notice. They are becoming less important, Jade, but I mean, you might still see them. Like, if it's the case of very basic ones, like, they might still test you on between X or Y is wrong and between X and Y is right. I mean, those kinds of things might still show up. But back to the issue of words in the prompt, Ravi, you should be able to just look at prompts as you go and kind of absorb what you have to absorb. Other questions? And Jade, I hope that, that brief answer is probably sufficient at this point. I mean, if we did that in a lesson, I could tell you more. Other things. Jade is typing. Okay, thanks, Ron. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to close up. I'm going to go ahead and log you guys out in the next, 30 seconds or so. Thank you for attending. It's a good session today. Thanks for your contributions. And the next session should be in 2 weeks at the same time, same channel, same everything. All right, appreciate it. I'm going to kill the recording, and have a great 2 weeks. Good night and good luck.